Join us as we dive into the 2017 American heist comedy, Going in Style. But before we jump in, a quick heads up. Spoilers ahead. We start with Joe, an elderly man who's heading to a scheduled meeting at the Williamsburg Savings Bank. There, he meets Chuck, the bank manager, who delivers some bad news. Joe is in default and must mortgage his house. But here's the twist. Joe lives with his daughter and granddaughter. This news is a real blow, and Joe just can't accept it. Then, out of nowhere, a group of bandits bursts into the bank, calmly taking control. With eerie composure, the robbers order everyone to lie down and stay silent. Chaos erupts, but there's something strange about how these criminals go about it. They're so eerily calm. Meanwhile, Chuck, in a panic, makes a noise that catches the attention of the gang's leader. This leader walks into the room where Joe and Chuck are, and with a strange sense of calm, he reassures Joe. After learning about Joe's financial struggles brought on by the bank's actions, the leader shows an unexpected sympathy. While talking, Joe notices a curious detail, a Mongol warrior tattoo on the leader's neck. Just moments later, the robbers swiftly flee the scene, bags of cash in hand. Fast forward to the next scene where Joe is at the police station. He's speaking with FBI agent Hamer, revealing the tattoo he saw. Joe suggests they trace the robber based on this tattoo, and even mentions a crime TV show, Law and Order, to help solve the case. But Hamer, with a chuckle, explains that real-life crime-solving takes far longer than an hour-long episode of a TV show. Later, Joe heads home with his family, where he starts telling his granddaughter all about the bank robbery. She finds it incredibly exciting, thinking it's super cool to be in the middle of a heist. But her mother quickly chimes in, cutting the conversation short, insisting that there's nothing cool about being part of a crime like that. The next day, Joe meets up with his two lifelong friends, Albert and Willie. They, too, have caught wind of the robbery after reading about it in the newspaper. Albert, ever the pragmatist, wonders if anyone even really got hurt, besides the insurance company, and predicts that the gang will probably never be found. Intrigued, Joe can't help but dive deeper into the mystery, talking with enthusiasm about what happened, despite the risks and consequences. The stage is set for a plan no one saw coming. The scene shifts to Joe talking to his friends, expressing how impressed he is by the robbers' quick and precise actions during the heist. He can't help but admire their skill, even in such a chaotic situation. The way they executed everything was swift, almost surgical. It's not something Joe sees every day, and it leaves a mark on him. His friends, Albert and Willie, listen intently, but soon the conversation takes a serious turn. Willie pulls out an envelope, and with a sigh, he shows Joe the pension debt notice they all received from their company, Wexler. This piece of news isn't just any ordinary setback. It's a devastating blow to their financial security. The company had frozen their pensions, rendering them virtually worthless. The next scene takes us to a tense meeting with other senior employees of the company. The manager breaks the grim news. Due to rising operation costs, the company is moving all its operations to Vietnam. Joe, holding the pension debt notice, confronts the manager, asking the crucial question, "What happens to our pensions now?" The response is cold and unforgiving. The pensions are gone, dissolved and frozen, leaving them with nothing. The anger in the room is palpable as Joe and his coworkers react, expressing their fury and disappointment. Their loyalty to the company means nothing in the face of such heartless decisions. The betrayal cuts deep. Later, the trio meets up in their usual spot, a cafeteria they've frequented for years. But now, it's a place that only reminds them of their struggles. Without the pensions, their lives have become even harder. They can barely scrape together enough to afford a decent meal, and every day feels like a financial battle. Amid their frustration and worries, Joe can't shake the memory of the bank robbery. It's like a spark in his mind that won't go out. He keeps bringing it up to his friends, fascinated by the idea of pulling off something like that, wondering if it could offer a solution to their problems. His friends listen, but it's clear they're skeptical, not quite ready to entertain the notion of turning to crime. That evening, after a small meal at Albert and Willie's house, Joe heads home. But when he arrives, he's hit with yet another piece of crushing news, a notice of default from the bank. Joe's heart sinks as he reads the letter. In just 30 days, he, his daughter, and his granddaughter will be homeless. It's a devastating blow, and he's left wondering how much more he can take. The next scene reveals that Willie's health is worsening. He's in the hospital for a checkup, and the doctor gives him some alarming news. His kidney failure is advancing, and he urgently needs a transplant. The doctor stresses that if Willie doesn't get a donor soon, his condition could become life-threatening. Willie, shaken by the diagnosis, is told that his only hope lies in a family member being a match. The urgency of the situation is clear, and Willie is faced with the reality that time is not on his side. Back at home, Willie has a video call with his family. The weight of his health issues adds another layer of stress to an already difficult situation. He's running out of time, and his family's support is his only hope. Willie, with the weight of his illness bearing down on him, feels an overwhelming sense of frustration. Not only is he facing a serious health crisis, but he also finds himself in a position where he can't even afford to visit his daughter and granddaughter as often as he would like. His desire to be with them more frequently, especially in his deteriorating condition, intensifies his anger and helplessness. It's a painful reality for Willie, and every day without them feels like another blow to his already fragile spirit. Meanwhile, in the next scene, we find Albert in a different setting. He's working as a saxophone teacher for a young boy. The boy's grandmother, Annie, is in attendance, and it's clear there's a budding chemistry between her and Albert. Their playful banter and subtle flirting are noticeable, hinting at a developing connection that seems to bring a spark of joy into Albert's otherwise monotonous life. The scene shifts again, and we're back with Joe and his granddaughter. She's showing him her exam results, a proud moment for her. She's aced every subject, and now she reminds Joe of the promise he made. If she gets straight A's, she'll get a puppy. Joe, moved by her excitement and determination, smiles and agrees. It's a small moment of happiness in an otherwise turbulent time. The next day, the trio comes together again, this time to celebrate Willie's birthday with other senior members at their lodge. The celebration, though filled with love and camaraderie, is overshadowed by the reality of their circumstances. Albert gifts Willie a wristwatch, one with a picture of his granddaughter, a sentimental token that highlights how much their families mean to them. But amid the birthday cheer, Joe brings up a subject that stops everyone in their tracks: the bank robbery. Joe, no longer able to bear the injustice of it all, proposes a plan to Willie and Albert. He wants them to join him in robbing the bank. The suggestion shocks both of them. How could Joe, a man struggling just to stay afloat, suggest such a thing? But Joe's reasoning is clear. He's about to lose his house, his life is falling apart, and the bank's actions are tearing families apart. Joe argues that the bank represents the heartless system that destroys dreams, and he feels compelled to do something about it. Joe, in a moment of honesty, adds that in the worst-case scenario, they'd end up in jail, but at least there, they might have a better life than on the outside, where they have nothing. The idea is radical, but it's the only option Joe sees left. After some thought, Willie, overwhelmed by his own frustrations and desires to provide for his family, calls Joe that night and agrees to join the plan. He admits that his main motivation is to have the means to see his family more than once a year, something he's not sure he'll ever be able to do under the current circumstances. Joe, now with Willie on board, turns to Albert for his participation. But Albert is quick to dismiss the idea. He's not ready to cross that line, not yet. The hesitation is palpable in his refusal, and for a moment, it seems like the plan might fall apart. But Joe, desperate, and Willie, eager to take action, continue moving forward. The following day, Albert, despite his reservations, drives Joe and Willie to the supermarket. They're planning to buy Chicken Blue, but their real intention is something much more daring. Albert waits outside, unaware of what's about to unfold. As soon as Joe and Willie enter the store, they begin to shoplift. It's a small step, but one that could signal the beginning of something far more dangerous. Worried about his friends, Albert decides to follow them. However, he runs into Annie, the woman he had been flirting with earlier, and it's clear that the encounter throws him off track. Meanwhile, Joe and Willie manage to steal a few items and sneak out, but the excitement quickly turns sour when a security officer notices them. A chase ensues, and in the chaos, Joe steals a basket from an elderly woman, using it as a distraction to escape with Willie. Albert, unfortunately, isn't so lucky. He gets caught by another security guard. While Joe and Willie race down the road, trying to evade capture, they nearly collide with a bus, and moments later, they are apprehended. After their release from the grocery store, Albert is filled with shame. He can't believe what his friends have gotten themselves into. Disappointed and ashamed, he drives away, leaving Joe and Willie behind. The two are left to regroup and rethink their plan. There's got to be a better way to pull this off. Determined to succeed, Joe decides to seek out Murphy, his ex-son-in-law, in hopes that he might have connections or advice from the criminal world that could help them. He reaches out to Murphy, asking for a criminal mentor who can guide him through the ins and outs of a bank heist. Back with Albert, he's not entirely done with the idea of doing something more. He returns to the grocery store, where he runs into Annie once again. This time, their conversation takes on a different tone as the tension between them grows, hinting that Albert may be starting to see a future for himself outside of his friend's risky plans. After a brief and unexpected moment of fun at Annie's house, Albert eventually returns to the familiar setting of the cafeteria, where he meets up with Joe and Willie. It's a moment of reconciliation, as the trio puts their differences aside and comes together once again. They share a quiet moment, but the tension in the air is undeniable. While they sit together, Albert picks up a newspaper, and a piece of news catches their attention. It's about their steel company, and the headline reveals some unsettling news. The company plans to use the employees' retirement savings to pay off utility bills, which is bad enough. But it gets worse. The Williamsburg Savings Bank will manage the corporate debt, meaning the bank will essentially take their pensions to cover the company's financial obligations. Albert is beyond angry at this point. He's had enough of being at the mercy of these heartless systems that seem to crush everyone beneath them. In a flash of determination, he declares that he's going to join Joe and Willie in robbing the bank. For the first time in a while, Albert feels a sense of purpose. The bank has stolen enough from them already, and now it's time to take back what's rightfully theirs. The trio moves forward with their plan, and soon they make contact with a criminal named Jesus. After a tense conversation, Joe convinces Jesus to help them with the heist. In exchange for his expertise, Joe promises to give Jesus 25% of whatever they steal from the bank. With a mutual understanding, Jesus agrees to join the scheme. The clock is ticking for Joe. He only has 20 days before he's evicted from his house, and this robbery is his last chance to change things. Jesus begins training the trio, teaching them everything they need to know to pull off the perfect bank robbery. They start by meticulously outlining the plan, step by step, ensuring that nothing is left to chance. The next task is to choose the getaway vehicle, followed by getting themselves into peak physical shape. But perhaps the most crucial part of the plan is setting up an ironclad alibi. The trio will use the biggest event of the year, the carnival, as their cover. The 20 days fly by, and before they know it, it's D-Day. The afternoon of the heist arrives, and at exactly 2:14 p.m., the trio is positioned at the carnival, waiting for the perfect moment to execute their plan. At 2:30 p.m., Willie drives a bus filled with passengers to the bank, the final leg of their elaborate scheme. The robbery unfolds just as planned. Albert, with nerves of steel, sets the timer and uses a gun to control the crowd inside the bank. Joe and Willie head straight to the clerks, taking the cash without hesitation. Everything is going smoothly, too smoothly, until something unexpected happens. A young girl offers Willie a doll, an innocent gesture that makes him pause. Willie, despite the tension of the moment, kneels down to reassure the girl, trying to calm her fears. But while he's distracted, a quick-thinking clerk takes the opportunity to call the police. As Willie sits down, checking on the little girl, disaster strikes. He suddenly collapses. It's a brief moment of panic, but Willie manages to shake it off. However, in the chaos, the little girl partially pulls off his mask, exposing his identity. She also notices the watch that Willie wears, the one with a picture of his granddaughter. The realization hits hard. It's a personal detail that no one should have known. Meanwhile, as Joe and Albert rush to help Willie, Chuck, the bank manager, seizes the chance to grab a gun and threatens the trio. He demands that they return the money. But Chuck's attempt to take control backfires when he misses a shot, and chaos erupts in the bank. In an instant, Joe pulls out his own gun and begins shooting in Chuck's direction, firing relentlessly. Chuck, terrified and overwhelmed, screams in panic as the situation spins out of control. Eventually, the trio makes a run for it, scrambling into the getaway truck and speeding off with $2.3 million in cash. Their hearts race as they drive away from the scene of the crime, adrenaline surging through their veins. That night, they find themselves at a fancy dining restaurant, celebrating their success. Albert, feeling the weight of the day's events, picks up his saxophone and begins to play. The music fills the air, a strange but fitting soundtrack for the moment. For a brief time, the trio lets go of the tension and enjoys their victory. But they all know this is only the beginning. The future is uncertain, and their next moves will be just as critical as the ones that got them here. The celebration at the restaurant is short-lived, and soon enough, the trio makes their way home. As they drive, the reality of Willie's health issues hits hard. The stress and excitement of the robbery have taken their toll on his already fragile body. Willie suddenly passes out from his worsening kidney failure, and the mood shifts from triumph to concern. The next day, FBI agent Hamer is already hot on their trail. He's managed to track down a figure caught on the bank's security footage, and his suspicions are growing. The figure he saw looks to be in his 60s, and he's convinced that Willie must be involved in the heist. Meanwhile, Albert and Joe rush Willie to the hospital, where the doctors confirm his dire condition. Willie needs a kidney transplant urgently, or else his situation will worsen rapidly. The news is grim, but the urgency to act is clear. Back at the grocery store, Hamer continues his investigation. He goes over the surveillance footage again and notices Albert's distinct walk on camera. The footage shows figures who resemble Albert, and the pieces of the puzzle start to come together. This leads Hamer to visit Albert's house, where he finds a team of cops ready to question him. Not long after, the authorities track down Joe and Willie as well. The trio is arrested, all under suspicion by the FBI. As the interrogation begins, Hamer attempts to break them down. But the trio sticks to their plan, refusing to crack under pressure. In a flashback, we see how Joe had meticulously swapped hats with his friends in the ticket room to confuse the cameras. He'd successfully sneaked out. Willie, on the other hand, had gone to the haunted house, where he changed costumes and disappeared. Albert, quick on his feet, had sneaked out through the public restroom and caught the bus to safety. Their alibis are airtight. After the heist, the trio had visited Jesus for money laundering, ensuring that their stolen funds wouldn't lead back to them. But the investigation doesn't stop there. Hamer decides to take the trio, along with other senior suspects, for a police lineup. They use the young girl who had witnessed the robbery to try and identify Willie. She looks carefully at each of the suspects, but when her eyes fall on Willie's watch, she hesitates. She recognizes the watch but refuses to identify him as the robber, leaving Hamer with no solid evidence to pin on them. Days later, things take an unexpected turn. Joe and Jesus meet up at the cafeteria, where Jesus surprises Joe with a cage containing a puppy. Joe, initially confused, is stunned when Jesus reveals a shocking secret. He is, in fact, the leader of the robbers Joe had witnessed during the heist. Jesus hands Joe the $2.3 million they had stolen, refusing to take any of it for himself. He even explains that the tattoo Joe had noticed on the robber's neck was just a temporary design, meant to mislead the police into thinking they had captured the wrong suspects. As if things couldn't get more surreal, Hamer walks into the cafeteria just as Jesus is explaining all of this. He hands Joe a wallet that he had forgotten during their previous encounter. The air grows tense, but Hamer, completely unaware of the deeper layers of deception unfolding around him, sits down and begins playing with the puppy in the cage, the very cage where Jesus has hidden the stolen money. Their conversation is interrupted when the puppy, a bit too curious, bites Hamer's finger, breaking the moment of awkward silence. Joe, without missing a beat, takes the cage from Hamer and calmly walks away, leaving the FBI agent none the wiser. With the money secure and the truth still hidden, Joe, Jesus, and the rest of the trio leave the scene unscathed. In the days that follow, the trio sends a suitcase full of cash to help their friends, coworkers, and fellow seniors at the lodge, those who had been betrayed by the company. It's a small but meaningful gesture to give back to the community that supported them through thick and thin. Eventually, Willie gets the kidney transplant he so desperately needed, and in a heartfelt moment, Albert steps up as the donor. The gratitude between them runs deep, and they both share a bond that goes beyond just friendship. In the end, Albert and Annie, the woman he'd grown close to over the course of the film, get married in a joyous ceremony. The trio, Joe, Albert, and Willie, celebrate their fortune, finally able to enjoy a bit of peace after all the chaos. As the credits roll, the narrator reminds us to like and subscribe for more videos like this, and don't forget to turn on notifications to stay updated with new content. It's a small but crucial way to support the channel. The video ends with a warm thank you from the narrator, signaling the end of yet another thrilling tale.